Okay, so welcome back. Late July 1854, and this is going to be our mid-year quarterly report, then the second quarterly report of this year, to kind of track our development and to talk about kind of what's happened and some plans really kind of going into the second half of the year. So going back to the Ipparit revolt, that was dealt with. Now that did actually spread. This is something that's separate, that's happened in Albania. This is not a scripted event, so it's just a localized rebellion. But I think it was initially in Janina. It was the Ipparit revolt, so it was. It spread to Thessaly and Salonika. None of the towns were taken, but it did require more than Hussein Avni Pasha. We eventually moved in Omar Pasha's kind of main field command, and it basically completely wrapped it up. But once we kind of compressed, if you like, all of the Greek rebels back into Epirus, it was a force of about 13,000. I did consider doing a separate video on it, but at the same time I thought it's going to be a 5-minute video just basically saying, hey, the revolt spread, we're going to move forces in to deal with it. And in a weird sort of way, after the experience of the Crimean War, it feels like such small fry as a military thing. Probably had it been before the Crimean War with Russia, I would have done an entirely separate video and found something to ramble on. Now, I don't know if you noticed, when I clicked on Omar Pasha, a face has appeared. So basically, when Omar Pasha's army engaged the Greek rebels were completely destroyed, annihilated. Hussein Avni was sent back, and we lost actually 2 junior commanders, not one, unbelievably. And they were just kind of shadow generals, so they were a bit like this, not Zaid Pasha, I'm trying to think of an example of one, basically a commander that didn't exist in real life. So like these kind of guys, Mehmed Rashid and Mehmed Vazif, these weren't real commanders, they're just shadow generals with kind of broadly plausible names. They have the same kind of portrait and this sort of thing. And one of those died, and it must be the case that we're kind of out of our inventory of shadow generals, but the game nevertheless creates a 2-star general. This is immersion ruining, you sort of unbelievably so. He is respawned as a 2-star general, has slightly different stats because, of course, Khurshid Pasha's stats developed over a period of time, but is broadly the same commander and has the same kind of portrait. So, yeah, nice one, Agiod. Thanks. That doesn't ruin the immersion of the game at all. I think the way that we're going to have to deal with this, the way I'm going to choose to deal with this, in order for it not to ruin the game, is every time this happens, if it happens with a shadow commander, it doesn't matter because they're sort of generic. But if it happens to a kind of famous commander, particularly one that was a kind of heroic commander, that featured quite significantly in both our campaign in Aden, before the Crimean War and during the Crimean War, what we're going to do is from now on, this commander is known as Osman. We'll work our way through the various Ottoman monarchs, beginning with the first one. He is Osman Pasha, and he was an understudy, of course, of Khurshid Pasha's. He was his protege, so he has broadly similar characteristics. He comes from the same kind of school, sort of same kind of military school, if you like, of aggression. He's a cavalry commander or a hussar commander, and some people have even said he has a passing resemblance. So there we go. That's how we're going to be dealing with Khurshid Pasha respawning, because Agiod couldn't basically figure out how to just create 10 or 15 generic commander templates with just it's the same picture. I'd have been fine with that, anyway. So yeah, we have a new commander, Osman Pasha. Incidentally, also, we lost did we lose 2 commanders? I beg your pardon, we lost 1 commander then. Abdi Ahmed. No, we lost 2 commanders, so the other one that respawned was Ahmed Pasha, but he doesn't have a kind of distinctive portrait. He has a generic portrait, so that's fine. So we have Ahmed Pasha as well. So yeah, that's quite a surprise. 2 commanders in quite a small revolt. It just goes to show that a lot of these commanders, it's sort of like, I don't know, it's like kind of Patton surviving the Second World War and dying in a car accident, and this, probably died in a car accident. I won't open that can of worms, but funny business. And then to engage kind of a small force of kind of rebels, and for 2 commanders to die, I suppose, you can imagine that happening, probably them being a little bit rash, having experienced massive Russian armies. They will easily deal with these rebels, making crazy decisions and paying for it with their lives. But anyway, the Epirot revolt has been crushed. Once our forces returned, I should point out also, Hussein Avni acquired enough experience in repressing the Epirate revolt that he was promotable. Now that is a game changer. I would say the other commander who's kind of, could be developed into the same level of Omar is Hussein Avni. Hussein Avni has excellent characteristics. He's a good by-the-book strategist. He's a fast mover, scorched earther. He is, like a really, really effective commander. And he's a 3-star general. He now can command an entire army stack. So I think the idea being that we will build an entire separate army stack around him. In terms of Rita Pasha's command, he still has the reserve army corps, a couple of kind of artillery regiments, and the kind of components really around which we can build an army. We have had to detach a force off. That's Zaif Pasha's force. Zaif Pasha's being sent to Aden as a relief commander. Now, it's probably fair to say that things haven't quite worked out for Ismail Pasha. Ismail Pasha, when we left him, was kind of looking to achieve a force concentration at Taiz, fusing together a cavalry division with really what is a marine division, plus a kind of conscript brigade. And he did. We waited to ensure that he had sufficient cohesion, moved on Hodeida, and he wasn't just defeated, he was really spectacularly defeated. I mean, he lost hard and instantly had to fall back. He's fallen back into Sana. We've got him inside the town, and yeah, he's in a really tight corner now. His force is being besieged. We're going to hope that we can kind of get some kind of reorganization whilst in the town, whilst it's being besieged. His force is still effective enough that Sana is not going to be stormed or anything like that. But once we've got enough organization, we're going to sally from the fortress, obviously, and try and kind of reimpose himself. And we've got a relief force moving towards Aden to shore up our position there. Now, we have poured huge amounts of resources into Aden with the intention of thinking, well, it's a bit of a sunk cost fallacy, but we'd already basically had some investments in this area that were lost. What we've done really is we're building a large pre-industrial fortress, but this is not just a colonial fort. This is the real deal. This is a really large fortress. We've got an anchorage, a depot, a mission, and a trade post. And the idea is that I think it would be, the Yemenis would be really hard pressed to kind of sack a proper large scale fort. Famous last words. You wait, probably early August they'll move into it and it will just fall. It's still being constructed, but as we know from experience, even a fortress that's being constructed will kind of still generate a kind of fortress garrison. So that's the situation at Aden. It was looking quite good. Ismail Pasha. He didn't die or anything, but it's probably fair to say that he underestimated. He's new to the theatre. He really seriously underestimated the kind of resolve and the fighting qualities of the Yemenis. And yeah, really tough characters. They're kind of real thorn on our side, and it's very difficult because, of course, once we get this division here, this is not an area that's easily supplied, as we know. Hopefully, with an anchorage and or harbour and a kind of depot in Aden, this will provide a base of operations, but we have to hold this kind of strip of land on the south coast, really. We do, of course, have merchants in the Indian Ocean, and those merchants can double up as kind of a force that can carry supplies, so that's good. So that should be fine. That's pretty much it in terms of our military moves then. We've got Hussein Avni plus a cavalry brigade. Hussein Avni is in charge of a cavalry division, plus an additional brigade in Nish, heading towards Albania to deal with a localized revolt there. We're quite lucky that a lot of these revolts broke out after the kind of conclusion of peace with Russia, and not in the midst of the war. That would have been tricky. Very tricky indeed. All quiet on the east. Now, one thing that we can say is we've intentionally kind of put Abdul Karim Nadir's force in Erzurum, into Erzurum. The reason being is because he has 2 conscript or militia army corps, and what we want is for this force to gradually be trained and converted into a regular force, and we can begin to see this process happening. So if we look at the various elements, the kind of regiments, if you like, that comprise, we can see that one of these regiments has been trained into a regular infantry force. This is no longer a force of conscripts. It's comprised of officers that are more experienced and so on and so forth. So yeah, where the idea is we're going to gradually convert these into kind of proper sort of forces. Yeah, that's it. All quiet in Iraq, nothing to report there. We have now we sent an infantry division to Aqaba because we have reports of this region falling under the kind of military control of rebels. Our infantry division got into Aqaba, but instantly ran into supply problems, has fallen back into Jerusalem. Bit of a daft move on my part, really, because we actually had, back from the kind of first Yemeni war, we had a kind of supply train sitting in Jerusalem, so I could have attached the supply train, but it means that this infantry division, this is quite remote, as you could probably imagine. This is a very undeveloped region. I mean, they have roads actually, but there's tracks tracks to the south and the kind of west, or tracks to the south and east of that position, and probably also tracks in Sinai. So yeah, very sparsely populated, very undeveloped, very unforgiving kind of part of the world. So this infantry division instantly struggled once he got into Aqaba. Got to pull them back, get them to recover some of their losses, attach that kind of supply train to that division, and we'll move back down into Aqaba and begin to kind of prepare a couple of colonial moves here. I think probably getting a colonial fortress here, and we're looking also to begin to kind of tentatively develop our colonial penetration in the Hejaz more generally. So we've got a mission being set up in Tabuk, not to be confused with Tobruk. We've also got a trade post and a mission being set up in Yanbu. The trade post would be quite handy here. We've got local access to dyes and wool, which we can trade with locals. And yeah, we're going to start, because the Hejaz is actually a protectorate. It's not an influenced territory; it is a protectorate. So there's no prospect of anyone else taking it. But we want to start consolidating a hold on both the Hejaz, Qatar, Bahrain, and Dubai. Also, these are all kind of protectorates. But yeah, turning these into formal colonies, I think is going to be an important stepping stone, especially for kind of sealing the deal really in the Yemen. It's going to be much easier once we have this region properly consolidated, so that it functions in much the same way as Iraq or Syria and this kind of thing. Obviously, these areas are sometimes still prone to revolt, but it's much less likely to be the case. Once this is a formal colony, the local tribes are kind of brought into the fold, their wealth is subsumed by our exchequer and this kind of thing. Now, that sort of brings me seamlessly into kind of economic development. Nothing really significant to report, really, except that one thing I'm noticing is that we are starting to get a really hefty stockpile of commodities and even manufactured goods. I mean, we're now I've actually set us up as an exporting nation with unloaded manufactured goods because we have so many of them. We have more than enough to kind of meet any demand for kind of construction projects that we have planned. We're completely meeting domestic consumption now, and we've opened the taps up completely on manufactured goods, so that manufactured goods now we have 80% availability, which means that we're offering these on a kind of quantity basis. We have now entered the stage really as a kind of manufacturing economy. We have enough manufactured goods shops, plus we've got one that's just been completed in Smyrna, plus the kind of guild-based production, which means that, yeah, we are... Let's actually compare our one second. So from the structures that we have, 17 units, plus we've got a cans goods factory that's being built in Sinop. More on that in a moment. And our crafts production is 11. So all of that kind of construction of plants that happened throughout that war, which, little things at a time, you begin the foundations of a factory here and there, that begins to add up. We now, in terms of manufactured goods, our kind of capitalist economy, if you like, produces almost, not quite, but maybe it produces anyway significantly more manufactured goods than the kind of guilds, if you like. So it's an economy that is increasingly weighted towards kind of like the capitalist mode of development. And that's pretty good news. The problem is we can't shift it, and our assets balance is beginning to climb. Now this is a harbinger. One of the best things about this game is the economic modelling, for my money anyway. This might be nothing. Now, the kind of global markets do kind of expand and contract a little bit without kind of serving as a catalyst for any kind of crisis. But one thing that I tend to notice in the game is once you're struggling to shift goods, whether it's selling them on your domestic market or exporting them, then that's the kind of signs really of, I suppose, what you'd kind of term like a crisis of overproduction, that more manufactured goods are being produced than can be sold on the world market. If we're struggling to shift manufactured goods, pretty good chance that most other countries are. Now, what the AI will do, very cleverly and very appropriately, is if if they can't shift a particular kind of commodity, the AI won't begin developing an RGO or a manufactory that produces that commodity. They may even close like a factory down or something like this, and that means that what you begin to see is a kind of crystallization of capital concentration. They begin to accumulate huge amounts of private capital where it's not reinvested. And once the average, I think across, I'm not sure if it's all powers or the great powers, once the average is at about 2,000 private capital per nation, there's a probability of triggering a global economic crisis. Now, they can vary in intensity and length of time. Their basic characteristics are as they are in real life. They result in dramatic increase in inflation overnight, the kind of market bottoming out, so all of your private capital seems to kind of vanish overnight. Again, it can vary in intensity, and it's as you imagine, it results in a kind of recession or a depression. It can last from anything up to 6 months or sometimes maybe much longer. And then eventually you'll start getting economic sunrise events where your inflation is lowered and this kind of thing. Now, this may not be a harbinger of that, but I am starting to think that by now, 6 months after the war, I would be expecting to be looking at indices that suggests fairly robust economic growth. Now, in terms of the actual numbers of units of goods sold in our national market, it's about the same as it was before the war began. And let's bear in mind that over the last 2 years, even though we've been fighting a war, we've actually engaged in very, very robust economic development in terms of laying plant, in terms of building factories. That's not really being reflected on goods being sold on the domestic market. It has resulted in a slight increase of exports, particularly with regard to textiles. In fact, textiles is the one part of the economy that is really, really robust. We're exporting more textiles than we can manufacture at the moment, and it's leading me to think that we might sort of look to kind of develop that a little bit further, maybe build a couple more textile factories. We should point out also that in terms of manufactured goods, we've only had them available for export really for a couple of terms. So we shouldn't draw too hefty conclusions. It's sometimes the case that it takes a little bit of time really for the kind of world market to bite, if you like, particularly if, for example, those countries which are importing manufactured goods. For example, if like Naples is importing manufactured goods, they may already have a really well-established relationship of buying, say, 3 or 4 units from Piedmont Sardinia every single turn, and that's a long-term thing. There's no real reason to change that up. So it really happens when you have a country that wants to suddenly begin importing either additional manufactured goods or just begin importing manufactured goods, whereas previously they were not, that you begin to sort of possibly shift manufactured goods. Now, if we actually look on the world market, we can see that the availability of manufactured goods fairly broadly does exceed demand. So that's one of the reasons why we're not going to be shifting. That's also partly due to the kind of markets we have access to. So one of the things that I'm going to be looking at doing is expanding our merchant fleet a little bit, partly so we can get more exotic kinds of rare materials from places like China, rice and tea and things like this, which we can shift on the domestic market. And just to kind of... the problem is we've tended to focus our kind of economic development, or skewed it towards getting connections with Western Europe. But of course, Western Europe, if we're looking to establish ourselves as an industrial economy, Western Europe already produces loads of manufactured goods, machine parts, and steel. They're not going to import those things from us. We want to export that stuff to places like China, maybe Japan, Latin America, places like this. And periodically, European powers, especially minor powers, will begin to import manufactured goods. And in some cases, even a really developed industrial economy like France or Britain might, if they have a particularly large project they have planned. Maybe the state has a project to massively enlarge a shipyard or something like that. The state will then actually kind of hoard or begin to hoover up manufactured goods that are available on the kind of world market in order to kind of ensure that they have the commodities in place to conduct whatever kind of whatever infrastructure development they have planned. But anyway, so we're a little bit concerned about that. Even our exports are not significantly larger than what they were, frankly, before the Crimean War. Our trade balance is a lot better, but that's really because we're not importing. We're not importing manufactured goods anymore. We don't need to import manufactured goods. We are already meeting demand, and there is surplus manufactured goods. So anyway, a little bit anxious there. There's a little bit of an anxiety. It'd be a real shame if at the end of the war I was kind of thinking to myself, this could be a really great opportunity for a huge economic boom and this sort of thing. But yeah, it'd be a real shame if the war is followed instantly by an economic crisis. But we'll see what happens. I kind of already mentioned, of course, we've got we've begun the construction of a kind of fortress at Constanta, which is something that we did already have planned. Also, we're looking to just make sure that now we're developing a kind of an industrial base that we're meeting demand for certain kinds of raw materials. So I've noticed that iron is a raw material that we need for manufacturing goods and this kind of thing. We've got a reasonable kind of inventory of iron, but I'm noticing that very gradually what we have available for export is dwindling. This suggests to me, and we're not exporting very much of it, frankly, either, so this suggests to me that we're probably beginning to kind of consume more iron in our economy. Well, there's a concrete way of testing that. Consume more iron in our economy than we're producing. Actually, it's about even Stevens at this stage. It looks like we're producing just about enough to meet demand. But actually, it's still a pretty good shout to kind of to ensure that we kind of keep pace. We're also going to be looking to. At the moment, coal's pretty decent. No kind of major issues with regard to kind of coal production. But that is something that at some point, very quickly, we'll notice that coal will start being hoovered up. You tend to notice that periodically you have these kind of bottleneck commodities form where perhaps the kind of world economy is becoming a bit top heavy. You have a rapid development of the productive forces, but no one's developing their coal or kind of iron production. So you start suddenly noticing your own supplies dwindling, and then you look on the world market and realize that no one's got any. So we need to keep a careful eye on coal and iron. Once coal gets to around 100 mark, we'll choke it off in terms of export. We don't want coal to be exported on that basis. We want to start hoarding coal. Make sure that we've always got between 100 and 150. Steel, we still produce. We don't actually have any steel plants yet. We do have the capacity because we had a technological development, of course, during the Crimean War, Basima Steel. We do have the technological capacity to build steel plants. It's not necessary yet. Our kind of background yield-based craft economy does produce a very small amount of steel, and it's sufficient at this time. That will change as the industrial economy becomes much more complex, and it really begins to start gearing, and especially once we start looking at things like railroads. And that really is the technology that I'm waiting for. That is the kind of qualitative change that we need now, really, is the capacity to build locomotives. I suppose locomotives are especially complex kinds of machines in some ways, and at the moment Ottoman economists or Ottoman engineers aren't quite there yet. They can build factories, they can build quite large factories, but in terms of kind of mastering, if you like, the alchemy of railroad development, we're not there, or it doesn't exist really anything more than a kind of theoretical. It exists on a theoretical basis because we had a transportation kind of technology that developed some time ago before the Crimean War. So we know that it exists theoretically, but in terms of implementing it, we just can't quite pull it off yet. But I honestly feel like we're on the cusp of that. If we've got the Industrial Revolution and we can produce steel, we can mine for coal, it's a case of connecting dots, isn't it, really? So that's the next important kind of economic development. We're going to keep a really careful eye on. Well, I should point out there was a small combat. We'll keep a really careful eye anyway. Between now and kind of, I guess the next report will be October or November. We're going to keep a careful eye on the global economy. Like I say, it might be that we're looking at a possible kind of crisis of overproduction type economic crisis, if you like, and anything can serve as the catalyst for that, right? Like, in terms of when it happens, and it could start with any power. It's not going to start with us because we always make sure that we don't have ludicrous amounts of private capital stored. We'll always find something to kind of invest it into. But yeah, I mean, our agricultural economy now has really large stockpiles of cereals. In fact, if I look at cereals, it may even be the case that it's just waste at this point. Yeah, wastages and corruption. So we have so much cereals now. That it's kind of it's just wasting away. Let's have a really quick look at economic listings and see which ones. So iron mine, tobacco, it's not open yet. They're all profitable still though, all profitable. Even cereals, even though it's kind of wasting away. If it's generating a small amount of profit, canned foods shop. Yeah, we'll kind of keep them open for the time being. And also, I've noticed with cereals is one of those funny kind of commodities that for a period of time, no one's importing, and then all of a sudden you have this kind of demand. It happens in kind of like short bursts. It's not a gradual and kind of linear thing. I should point out actually before I mention the kind of battle that happened in the Med. In addition to the iron mine, we have we've begun the construction of a canned goods factory. Now, canned goods factories are really interesting and quite dynamic manufactories. What they essentially do is, well, look, your economy will gradually convert, if you have it activated as a converting process, all kinds of foods, cereals, fruits, cattle, fish, and so on. It will gradually convert a portion of those into canned goods. And those canned goods begin to kind of accumulate, or preserved food, if you like. Now, one way that you can begin to convert a large agricultural base into kind of manufactured goods, if you like, is through canned good factories. And what that does is it actually it turns those preserved foods into manufactured goods. So it's like a translator. It's a kind of converter. It's a way of converting a portion of your agricultural economy into a kind of an industrial economy. And because what I've noticed is we periodically have to keep stopping conversion. I mean, at the moment we have conversion stopped. The reason being is because we have so many preserved foods that we have huge amounts of wastage. Now, once we have this turned off, it has the other effect. We start seeing loads of wastage of cereals. So we do have a lot of waste in our kind of agricultural sector, particularly focused around cereals. Of course, cereals was the focus for our earlier economic development. It was cereals. And the reason for that is because I never ever wanted to have any kind of shortage of food at any time. I wanted to ensure that before we did anything, we had our population had an access to a broad range of agricultural goods and foodstuffs. And over a period of time, over a period of many years, that adds up in terms of providing us with kind of strategic map. With good population satisfaction. Population satisfaction now is very good in certain areas. For example, if we go to the work or not. So in different economy. So in a number of areas, for example, Adrianople, we've got popular enthusiasm, Constantinople, those areas where we're seeing some kind of economic development, really, really good. Also in strange areas like Bitlis, for example, and Balakasir, I think, popular enthusiasm. That has ramifications, for example, like an area that has popular enthusiasm, those factories are more productive, the RGOs are more productive. Areas that are indifferent, you don't have great kind of you don't have great output, and in areas where you have like opposition and where your regime is not very popular, then of course you might start seeing strikes and demonstrations. We don't have any kind of strikes or demonstrations now. That was a characteristic of the Ottoman Empire, but we do have, even though the workforce is relatively settled, we do have kind of ethnic conflicts. We do have kind of organised groups trying to kind of take up arms against us, but that's not really rooted in kind of industrial strife. It's rooted in kind of ethnic struggles and kind of groups of locals that want to kind of they want to maybe join Greece or Serbia or something like this. That's it. We've begun the construction of a canned good factory, and that's basically our economic report for sort of for late July 54. We got reports that there were pirates spotted in the Western Mediterranean, even though it's far afield, really, from kind of Smyrna. I thought this was a great opportunity to give one of our admirals a bit of combat experience, and also to kind of impose ourselves in the Mediterranean, as a maritime power. We keep the seas clear, that kind of thing, show of force. So we sent Osman Pasha. I didn't think that he was going to see anything, but yeah, he instantly saw these were Dow's raider ships. Incidentally, it looks like they're operating from, there was a suggestion they were operating from Tripoli somewhere. I don't know where. Let's have a look. There we go, Tripolitanian pirates. So ironically, they're actually operating from our own colony. We sunk those ships very, very in short order. And this was our own raiding fleet, incidentally, from the Crimean War. And we're going to bring these boys back to Smyrna after a really successful kind of counter piracy operation. That is it. Yeah, that's it. That's just the unsupplied force in Aqaba. Yeah, that's it for 6 months in the year. We're going to keep a careful eye on the economy, as I say. Not great omens, but it may be nothing. Could be everything, but it may be nothing. It may just be that, because in a lot of ways we're quite new to some of these markets. Like, only 2 years ago we were primarily an agricultural economy. We're now a manufacturing economy, but there are already well-established manufacturing economies like in France and Prussia and Britain that are already exporting these goods and have been for many years. And it looks like they're exporting more than there's much demand for. It doesn't mean there isn't demand. It just means that there's only a limited amount of people can only buy a limited amount of things. So anyway, we'll keep an eye on that. Hoping it isn't a kind of the signs of a crisis of overproduction. But if it is, we'll get notification of an economic crisis. We'll get serious inflation, and hopefully it won't last too long. One thing we're going to do, as I say, we're going to expand the merchant fleet. We're going to start getting merchant fleets off of Mexico, Latin American countries, I think in various trade boxes, and also China, Japan, places like this. And it just kind of plugs us a little bit more into the kind of global markets. And hopefully that might have some ramification for us in terms of our economic development. That's it. That's our second quarterly report of 1854. There's always something that I feel like I've missed after. I don't in this case, but I'm sure there will be something I missed, and if I do, I tend to include it in the next video anyway. But yeah, next video will be probably sort of October, November time, and I'll see you then. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.